Everybody, welcome back to the Cocktails Code and Conversation podcast. Coming up this week on the pod, I sit down with identity and access management industry expert and thought leader, Mr. Darran Rolls, as we talk about the state of identity and get his view on what he thinks is going to be next for the identity industry. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by the On the Corner Podcast Network on onthecorner.us. Guys, check it out. We've got so much new content coming. Just released, brand spanking new, hot off the presses, the All Mixed Up podcast. Check it out on all the streaming platforms. Of course, brought to you by On the Corner Media Group. As well, we've got Open Door Conversations that's going to be launching very, very soon. And we've got another podcast in the works. Don't want to tell you too much about it yet, but it is coming up. As we get some more details, I'll let you know about that. Also, hey, check out our Lovecraft Country recap show. All kinds of content coming from the On the Corner Media Group, of course, on the On the Corner Podcast Network. So without further ado, let's get to this podcast of C3. See you after the break. All right, so we're back. Another episode of Cocktails, Code, and Conversation. Special guest, Mr. Darran Rolls.
All right.
And of course, I hit the wrong button there. So you got a drum roll, and then you got the applause.
I get both. That's good.
You get both. Welcome to the pod, sir. Thanks for taking the time and being on.
Awesome.
I always like to let my guests start off by, just kind of giving a longer introduction. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks.
Yeah, sure will. And thanks for having me on, David. Great pleasure to talk with you again. So I'm Darran. I've been in the identity management industry for pretty much all of my career, and that's how come David and I came to meet each other. I was the CTO at a couple of different identity companies, and last being SailPoint Technologies. I'm basically a techie that has been in sales and the organizational challenges of delivering technology for pretty much my entire career. I've got a great love for the space and, I guess a great love for David. And I'm really glad that he asked me to come on and chat about some various things, identity and life and whatever he wants to talk about.
Yeah. So I want to, do you remember when we first met? I want to see if you remember.
I do. We were at a trade event somewhere, and I remember you and I getting into a very intriguing conversation about hierarchical delivery of, at the time, it would have been SPML, standards-based messaging.
Yeah.
It was kind of, we geeked out, right? Let's face it.
We did. It was Digital ID World, right?
Yes.
Somewhere in California. I want to say somewhere outside Los Angeles, I think, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I do remember us geeking out. I actually remember we found this little table and we sat down, and I think it was like a napkin, and just like mapped out this entire thing with SPML. Right. We tagged it like the identity bust and how we could do all these things with SPML and send identity data through. Exactly. And that was that stuck with me. That was actually my first real kind of trade conference with identity, right? And it was identity was still really small then.
It sure was.
I was working for the government at that time, and I remember coming back just so fired up after that conference. And I was telling people, look, all these things we can do with SPML. We can implement this. We can do this. And everybody was just like, we're not going to do that.
Really? What's that all mean? Yeah, I mean, I think, we were both a little ahead of our time, right? Yeah. I mean, that's always been my remit. And I think with full disclosure, you did work for me for a little while. So that's why I snagged you when you were available, because that's always been my job, or my role has been to think that little bit further ahead, right? To be out ahead of where things are going. And we were talking about it then, what we still yet haven't managed to deliver, really, if you think about it. And that was a standards-based way of talking and connecting for identity. So, I guess we were a long way ahead of our day then. So
yeah, but I think I just did this talk at Identiverse this past summer. Again, this time it was about SCIM and just the power of SCIM and some of the things you can do, right? And SCIM being that second generation, doing, I guess, clearing up the mistakes that we made with SPML, right? Like the whole XML based thing. That was rough, but that's where we were at the time. But I look at it now when I was doing research for that talk, and I look around at how many vendors, how many people have picked up on SCIM, and it's gotten the track record that and the traction is actually the better word there, that SPML never got, right?
That's true.
It's not just the vendors, which is good, right? It's not just, hey, this vendor says, oh, we got a SCIM gateway, go use this, or we make a SCIM connector. It's actually, a lot of the applications that deploy have SCIM interfaces. Therefore, it's driving the adoption, and you're starting to see a lot of that exchange, right? And so I think it's the market and the time is right for that to kind of start happening. People starting to realize that, hey, we can extend SCIM, we can exchange this identity information, and we can kind of make that lateral way of exchanging information. That's one of the things I'm actually excited about for where the market is right now and what's going on in identity. So
hope. Yeah, but you are right. I think there's been a lot better adoption this time round, but we're still not quite there, really. In truth, you'll still see a SaaS app being delivered with a custom identity management provisioning interface for it, and there's no reason for it. There's no sense to it, and they just haven't done it. I still think there's some, and for those we're sort of gabbling away here, assuming everyone knows, SCIM being the system for cross-domain identity management. Basically, LDAP over REST is kind of, I think, a fair way of categorizing it. But a lingua firma for basic get, put, post, delete messages around identity changes. Create an account for this person, delete this person, read this person. There's a quick definition there, but yeah, I still think there's still things it needs to do. Maybe that's something we can talk a little bit more about. I think as an industry, it's kind of nice that I'm now not a vendor. This is the first time in 25 plus years that I've not been representing a company whose job is to convince you that you should buy their technology.
Right.
I'm free, and that's a very interesting place to be. I can be a little bit harsher on myself and the industry at large, and maybe a little more honest, I guess. But we're not there on SCIM, no doubt.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think it is refreshing and nice because you really can, take a hard look at the industry and say, okay, this is what's really missing, or this is what's really needed. And so, with that, I want to take that. Let's kind of dive in one of the first topics I really wanted to get into, and we kind of already started, but where do you see the identity and access management market now? What's the state of it in your opinion? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, and first of all, obviously, any comment I would make here is purely my own. I did leave SailPoint at the beginning of this year, actually end of February. I can't help being influenced by my past, I guess, but it definitely comments of my own. With that caveat, I think we're still a long way from it, from where we think things should be. There's the now recognized scope of, for example, an identity governance project is pretty broad. But yet everybody still has deployment challenges. I was talking to a large financial institution just last week, and they're really still struggling to onboard apps. The kind of things that we talk about, basic stuff, right? Get the apps onboarded. That they've got somewhere near 6,000 apps, and they are 2,500 into their journey. And you look at those sorts of numbers and go, boy, something's too hard here. Okay. And we know what it is. There's some challenges in connectivity. So I think what we as identity governance thinkers, and I separate identity governance, as I know you do, from access management and privilege management. But identity governance thinkers, its sort of scope is so important. It's about visibility. You can't manage what you can't see. Right. And it's an unfortunate fact that as an industry, we're just not there. It's still too hard. It's still too costly. Connectivity is still too difficult, I think, is one of the drivers there. Yeah. One of the shames.
That's one of the areas that I've always poked at, right? And I've said for a couple of years now, why is this still so hard, right? Of all the advancements we've made, all the things that we've done as an industry, how many years have we created connectors? If we don't know by now, okay, the general way to connect a connector, that this is one of the first areas we really should have looked at as an industry for automation, right? This should be literally point clicking out of the box. It should take you 1 to 2, 3. Now, granted, it took, APIs had to open up, things had to kind of happen on the application side, but those things have happened, right? And applications are now built API first to where most of these applications, as soon as they're published, there's an entire API set. So it's like, the ability to interrogate and look at an API and, systematically exchange data, that should not be, it should still be this process of, oh, let me go connect this and do this connector and go through it. Like, it should come out of the box like, oh, you're pointing to whatever it is, like SAP, you're pointing to, Workday, fine, right? Connect, here's the APIs, pull in data, and I'm done, right? At least to the part to get started, right? I know the part is, the setting up of the data attributes, right? The mapping of the attributes, that's always going to be
tough,
tough and company specific, but the general nuts and bolts, that you can really get that.
Yeah, and I think there is a dividing line in there between new apps and legacy, you might say. And the problem is obviously legacy, as you understand it never goes away, one. And it's really hard to retrofit in that connectivity. We can't really say to everybody, you should support SCIM in the legacy space. But even if we pretended that we could, I think as the vendor community holds a little responsibility there, and the interoperability is not click and go for SCIM today. The standard itself has some issues in it around dealing with real life use cases at scale. So it's not a complete picture, but I do think the end user, the buyer, has a part to play here in that, would you buy an app today if it didn't have an API? Well, the answer is probably no. Right? You'd hope, right? You'd hope you wouldn't subscribe to a SaaS app that locked up your data without an API. Right. And I think that one step below that, we have to then say, but you've got to have a SCIM API. Right. I'll use your app if I can get my users in and out using this protocol. And it's a bit like, you wouldn't buy a car without a steering wheel. And so you just have to, I think our end user community has to start putting down the hammer a little bit. Yeah. I think on the other side, for vendors, unfortunately, the connectivity stable, as it were, is still a significant differentiator, and it's used. It's a revenue generator and it's a market differentiator. So even if we had our magic wand and we waved it and all of a sudden everybody had the same connectivity, would the vendors actually support it? Because it's how they differentiate themselves. So maybe not. So I think if I look back over the state of the union, I guess, as it were, that scope is not really there. We've not really got out to all the apps that we absolutely should. I think there's a little bit of a feature challenge as well. And again, this is that now I'm standing on the beach rather than swimming around in the ocean, I can be a little more plain. I've spent my career creating new things and convincing people that they need them. Mm-hmm. Right? And what that's resulted in is, a good friend of mine back in Tivoli, 20 plus years ago, had a very choice phrase for it. It was the feature exploitation of a client, basically, used in some different rhyming words. Right. We won't do that on the podcast. But to this perpetual drive for feature, I think has overridden us a little bit in that the basics aren't done yet. If you can't do JML, if you can't do basic joiner, mover, lever, even take the mover out, if you can't join people into the apps they need, give them a self-service environment, take them out, the rest of the identity governance stack means nothing. Right. And I think, again, as vendors, we are partly responsible for that. We want to keep generating the newest buzz, the newest cool thing, and that makes it difficult for the customer, I guess. So,
what are your thoughts on identity becoming more transactional? What I mean by that is that blurring that line between authentication and authorization, right? And getting identity controls a little bit closer to where things actually happen, right? Because right now, a lot of the identity management tools, a lot of identity controls, right, even the governance tools, things of that nature, they're kind of outside of the flow. They're reactive. They wait for something to happen. This person authenticated, yes. Now they're trying to go do this. Oh, now I know something's wrong. Let me go kind of make a change. But I'm slowly seeing, especially with some of the authentication providers, just kind of spreading out, doing more authorization. I'm seeing authentication getting blended a whole lot more, which then kind of brings in this question of how does governance fit into that, and where does the line actually stop between authentication and authorization? So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty hot topic, and obviously, as we mentioned a moment ago, there's sort of triad, as we call it, between governance, access management, and privilege management being separated. And there's lots of good reasons for them to be separated. But you are right, that trend towards a more just-in-time delivery of something is good for all kinds of reasons. As we're now making decisions much closer to the application, or in search of zero trust, much closer to the policy of that access, right? We're doing it much more context and risk based. There's a tendency to make the entire authorization decision at that late bound time.
Right.
I think it's our job as let's keep the identity governance hat on to remain pure to its objectives. And that is, sometimes that's a little worrying, right? Because you're having decisions made very close to the entire access control model is late bound, based on attributes done by the authentication provider. It's very easy for the things that we've come to expect from governance to be left behind. A prior model goes away and something less governable, less auditable, less understandable by the business is replaced. And that's not a good thing, because it's much harder, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's inevitable. And I think the blending, I think I think it was at a Cupping Coal event some 5-6 years ago, I had this picture of the separation of church and state. And I was like, authentication should never be authorization.
Right.
And I think I still believe that. But it's okay for one provider in one stack to do both if they have the right separation of duty between themselves.
Yeah, it's that line is so interesting, right? Because you want to, on the aspect of zero trust, right? That means we want a lot more context and know much about our users, like when we authenticate, and be able to, just kind of inject that just in time, like, who is this person? When they last logged? What do I know about this person? Can I trust this person? What attributes do they need? Okay, now let me go authorize them, right? So I want these rich questions to be able to be answered when I authorize somebody, right? And so it's very easy to just say, okay, well, let me put that in, with the authentication. So when I authenticate, when I know that it's Darran, I'll just go ahead and say, oh, it's Darran, and this is all this stuff about him, so I'll go ahead and give him these things to go authorize him at the same time as well, right? Which in security, as we always know, right, all of the security people our red flags jump off, because we're just like, ooh, that's a whole lot in one place, right?
Sure.
Now
Absolutely.
It's one thing, right? Now it's one thing that I have to get past, right? Whereas it's always kind of having those multiple gates. So
and I think and this is a pretty relevant topic. I've been talking to some folks about this just over the last couple of days. That when you're putting together that contextual or risk-based authentication and authorization architecture, that you don't mix authentication context with authorization model. Because the truth is, we all know how to put a piece of software in front of an application and stop its access and challenge you for things, right? And collect information. But where does that information come from? So at this point, it's saying, I'm a freelance contractor. Where does it get that information? Where does that attribute come from? And I think NIST did a very good job of coining the phrase attribute providence. And I think there's a lot more into it than that, because as we make decisions based on shared attributes, how are those attributes managed? Because they then become the authorization model. And I've just always been fascinated by that. There's sort of, because that's where we're going, right? Where eventually I'm going to turn up with my phone, my attributes, and you're going to let me into the podcast or not, right? So where does it all come from? It's kind of interesting. Cool space.
And then the who's watching the watcher, right? So I got these attributes, and so how do I know that these attributes are valid? How do they get in there? What's that process, right?
Exactly. And when you look at these, this is, you and I could geek out on this stuff forever, right? But when you really get down to the nitty gritty of it in all of these, and we used to call this, now call it zero trust, right? We used to call it attribute-based access control. Fundamentally in the middle, the same things are happening somewhere in the process. What people tend to miss is the fact that you've still got to catalog the entitlement. It's, there's a very identity governance centric terminology, but that's really what it comes down to. You still got to say, we'd love to come in. You must have seen this in your in your government work. Security level. It's real easy. If your security level's above 5, I'll let you in. But how do you correlate that down into an application? And the application owner then has to break their app down into these things. And there's this process, this business process that has to happen that is traditionally identity governance. So I just don't think it goes away. I just think it moves somewhere else in the paradigm. We're just doing it prior to that in the setup of the meaningful data.
Yep, absolutely. So with this, I'm going to switch topics just a little bit, just because I know we'll continue to go down this identity rabbit hole. So looking at customer identity access management, right? And I think, we've, you and I, obviously we had the history at SailPoint, and we had, various conversations while we were there about, just kind of that market. It was always, kind of adjacent and not something that while at SailPoint we looked at, right? But now just kind of looking back at it, I really think the last couple of years, right, this market has really gotten hotter, right? As more people are starting to realize, like, man, this is something that's truly different and has some different use cases and things that I need to solve, from my employee state. And then, of course, obviously with the GDPR and then CCPA and then all the privacy legislation that's coming out in the US, right? This attention to detail of, hey, we really need to make sure we're taking care of customers' attributes and what they have has driven this CIAM market. So when you look at it, there's a burning question right now that's going around. Like, so I'm in ID Pro and the Slack channels all the time, right? And one of the big topics in the identity management channel right now is one or two, right? Do I have one place for all my employees, and that's why I manage one system? And do I have another one for my customers? Do I make one that houses them all? And I can tell you, man, it's split, right? There's no consensus right now amongst the, which we were saying, our fellow experts, and it's just, it's the typical, it depends on the situation and the risk, the risk adherence of like whatever customers using it, but there really isn't a good solid, like, yes, definitely go this way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it's a sad end point for the conversation if we just say it depends, right? It's so customer and deployment specific, because it sounds like a total cop-out, but it's basically true. I think at the core of it, why should they be any different, really? And it's one thing, I mean, as we've seen, this whole COVID experience that we're now in has been very good for everybody in the identity management industry, because I think what a lot of people have realized is everybody's just out there. We've tended to think about our employees as little owned things, which I still think from a data perspective is true. That hasn't really changed. But why is that any different now? Why are my customers any different to my end users, my employees and my contractors? And if they're all potentially sitting in the same SaaS app, which sometimes they are, as we know, why is it any different? Right. I think a lot of the time it comes down to the practicalities of history and budget. Historically, no identity management project can ignore its legacy, its history, its legacy of applications, and its legacy of deployment infrastructure. And so they're quite often coming from different buying centers, right? You've got an internal compliance and governance team, and you've got a GDPR initiative driving something on the client side. And so potentially those different drivers require different timelines and different technology decisions and different teams. But at the end of the day, it's an account with a profile
Right.
with a set of access privileges on it. How hard can it be?
Right.
There's some interesting things that we tend to do for a customer identity in terms of what I call progressive profiling.
Yep.
You know, this classic pattern of kind of starting real soft and not requiring much authentication, and then driving my up the chain to when you're a full-on customer and I'm all over you and I send you a token, you know, at the bank. But is that not just the story of zero trust that we're now deploying inside the enterprise? Right? So, you know, that's contextual access, right? I mean, you're not doing anything risky, so I don't mind much. So I think the lines are just blaring. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I agree with some, right? I see what I see is like the nuances that kind of drive them apart. So I'm gonna go down the progressive profiling, right? So you're absolutely right. So I collect a little bit and I say, okay, customer, like just give me your name. That's all I need, and you can shop around and kind of do your thing. I don't really need anything else. Oh, now you're gonna make a transaction, a little bit more information, you know, maybe just, you know, address, things like that or whatever. You know, I don't need you to sign up and sign in to be, you know, one of my customers. I can let you do a guest checkout, all those things, right? And so from that aspect, there is that I'm going to give you certain things so I can give you a token from the secure access point. Like you're going to do a checkout, like I got to at least do something to authorize it to get you paid. But the other part of it too is with that profiling is like, I want more data for the marketing team so I can turn around and market to you so I know who you are, customer. I know some preferences. Like okay, Darren, you're back. That's great. I want to know that it's you and some things that you liked and looked at, because I want to make your experience better and easier and really more profitable for me. Like I'm going to streamline you as you come into my application to certain things that are geared towards you, right? And those are real things that usually drives, you know, what the marketing team or the customer retention teams wants to see. And so those are the things where right now you look at it and you say, I want to make these one. It's hard because you're going to ask of this platform like, hey, I need the ability to do this progressive profile and stuff, but I need you to integrate with my CRM tool and do these things and be able to grab and inject this data. And oh, by the way, like I only want this data, you know, available to certain people and certain things or whatever.
Right.
All flows and things that from an identity side we're so used to on the employee side, but it's just now it's applied to the customer. So those are like the little nuances where it pulls it apart. I was actually on the camp. I was more so on the side of they should be separate. And then earlier this year, I had a conversation with Jonathan Edwards from Secure IT Source, and you know, kind of listening to him and his take on it, and he kind of swayed me to the side. I was like, you know, they really should be one, because his hypothesis is that right now we're seeing all these things coming for customers and all these legislations being passed to protect the customer. He thinks that it's not too far off, that it's going to have the same thing with the employee. Like the biggest difference right now is as employees, when you sign up, like you have no, like the
sign it away.
This is your account. Like I have your data. Like this is it. You have no say so of where I put it, right? Customer, it's all in their hand now with this legislation. Sure. And so he made a good point. It's like, do you really think that that's going to stay where employees won't then have that same thing? Because all of a sudden, if as an employee, I'm used to going to Google and Amazon and all these other places and being able to control, like, you know, the right to be forgotten and all these things. Yeah. Why would I not have that same type of function at my employer?
Well, it's very
than some of the other ones.
It's very regional. I mean, I can say that for most regulated industries in the US, you know, and then put my CISO's hat on. I didn't say that I was the last 4 years I was our CISO. I own it. You're in it, you know, usually in this conversation, bring your own identity comes up, right? When are you going to support bring your own identity? When's it going to be bring your own employee identity? I'm like, it's not happening. I own you. You know, you sign an employee contract. I have the right to take you to court if you talk about I mean, it's a very different view of things. And whereas sort of idealistically, I can appreciate why I would want that myself, perhaps, but I just don't see it fitting into the controls and obligation umbrella that most enterprises in the US at least work under. Now, you know, who knows?
I think it brings up an interesting, you know, thought, right? And this, I can't remember when this Sony hack was specifically. It was years ago, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, where the hack that happened to Sony actually ended up releasing employee data as well.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of personal information on employee data. And so it goes to the question, obviously, like as an identity person, security person, that flag went up for me, because I'm like, it just goes to show, it's like, yeah, you trust these employers and there's all this information that you give them, right? But none of these employers are really primed to protect any of that data. This is just how we do business. So we have all this thing, we're going to put it somewhere. So that's where I can kind of see some of this legislation pushing hard, going, hey, okay, employer, you want this data from me, and as an employee, like, what are you doing to protect my data? Right?
Yeah, my right to be forgotten is maintained at the corporate level, of course, right? So that's not purely a customer relationship thing. I mean, it's an employee relationship thing too. So that has helped. At the end of the day, I think it really does come down to that difference in requirements and drivers and who's paying for the project and that scope question. Because at the end of the day, if we're really talking about two accounts, let's just say you're the fictional dream where everything's directory enabled. Right? You've got a single directory, be it in the cloud or on-prem, I don't care. You've got a stable authoritative identity source, wherever it comes from, and you're basically provisioning groups for your employee. Holy mackerel, there are just about any CISM solution on the planet is going to work for you. And if that's where you're spending your money, and I can get that license fee free and do it for my internal employees as well, why wouldn't I, right? But usually the requirements are more complex. There's separation of duty requirements. There's a bunch of legacy that it doesn't connect to the directory, and you know the story. It just gets more complex by the day. Yeah. So I think there shouldn't be a technical reason why not, but invariably there are.
Right. Absolutely. My next question, we're changing complete topics. So I want to ask you to put on your executive kind of hat on, right, with your experience sitting at the C-level, for 20 years. One of the big topics, right, just in our industry right now, the tech industry in general, is diversity and inclusion, right? And it's a big topic.
Oh, yeah.
Race is a big topic right now in the U.S. But one of the things I'm talking to people about, and I'm really hitting on, is just the diversity and inclusion, within the tech space, right? It's something that we've struggled with as an industry for a while.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've had, different conversations, different initiatives. So my question for you is how is it, kind of take us into like the C-level boardroom, right? And how these conversations happens, and how do executives view this and look at it?
Well, I mean, my exposure, my experience is pretty limited I've always been in the technical end of software sales, right? Of software delivery and of security delivery. And let me talk first of all generally, secondly, firstly personally, fortunate being technical in nature. I've never seen. I see that diversity needs to be enforced because it's not happening by itself, and the numbers absolutely show that. But I think it's always come down for us in the pure tech side of things. It's about capabilities. Yeah. And if somebody has those capabilities, I don't care who they are and where they come from. To give you a silly example, I don't know if you've been following the new FX series on Hulu, Devs. I don't know if you've seen it, but interest, kind of techie, a bit geeky, sitting there watching it with my wife, and there's the kid on there who's working in he's a 10-year-old, looks like a 10-year-old boy, basically. Right. And he's working on this, he's at the center of this super coder, environment, super secure and everything else. And my wife's like, that ain't never going to happen. I'm like, if he can sling the code, I can care less I don't care who he is, right? It doesn't matter. And so I think we're very fortunate in that respect from its preferences and its drivers. But at the end of the day, something's got to happen. I think I saw it was a CNBC analysis numbers, and I think that in 8 years, Facebook had moved less than 1% in in Black people in their staff, right? In over 8 years, that can't be right. I mean, they're in tech, so it can't be right. So something actively has to happen. How do you do it?
It is one of the things to where, and I've had various parts of this conversation before. Whereas the beautiful thing about this industry is that it is very much, if you've got the capabilities, like it's open in that nature. It's like, hey, look, if you can get it done, you can get it done. Great. Like, come to the table, let's get this done. but it's, we have to do, we have to do a better job of letting people know that it's there, right? That
Yeah, agreed.
there's some door or some wall that's there that is preventing more people from coming in. And a lot of it comes down to, I mean, you can go do the research, right? It comes down to just, bias, right? Both realized and unrealized, right? A lot of people just don't, you came up and it's like, okay, I've coded with this set of people and it's always been like this since college, since high school, since whatever. And so when I think about someone's like, oh, we're hiring, I'm going to go get, this person or things of that nature. Right. And so it's those things that we have to be, willing to break, willing to, talk about, be willing to have, the conversations and address it. And I think part of the problem, and we saw this when this really first became a big thing, when Google and Apple and Amazon were all just getting taken to the woodshed about this issue, is that the whole defense thing's like, well, what are you talking about? We got this, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, why are you so defensive about it? Let's look at the numbers, right? And so
the numbers never look good. That's why.
Right, exactly. And I will always shout out Netflix for this, right? Because, and I think there's more companies have done as well, but Netflix, it's literally on their page and it's not even hard to find, right? You go to Netflix, you go to careers, like it's literally right there. They have a chart that they update every quarter where it's like, here's how much we suck at this, right? That's not what it says, but that's how I take it. Like, here it is. Right?
Honesty.
Raw numbers of what they have or whatever. And you can see it and you can track the differences and changes. Like, that's what it, to me, I was like, that's what it's about. It's like, okay, put it out there, right? Like, here are the numbers, and then go, okay, now we have something to go back and track against and go, all right, well, here's what the effort we put. Well, then what did it do with our numbers? Well, it didn't affect it. Why didn't, right? And you will see how important it is to a company, because no company wants to put out numbers that everybody can see.
Absolutely.
And not have them change, right?
Well, but our experience in every other area of governance and oversight shows us that until legislation has teeth, things don't change. Right. Basically, we're driven by dollars and we're driven by other factors that don't include this potentially. Right? It's not a buy-in criteria. And to your point, advertising it makes it a buy-in criteria. I want to do business with the kind of companies that do that. And I think our obligation in tech is greater than most other areas, because the accessibility for what we do is simple. It's a bloody laptop and its availability to the internet, our ability to educate over, to take somebody from a deprived or unaware or unavailable environment. This might be somebody who lives in the backwaters of India, or it might be somebody who lives, wherever it is. You can plumb that into them, right? It's available wherever you are. So there's not really an excuse for tech not to lead in that. And these are great careers. These are careers that are never going away,
right?
And I've always found that diversity and engagement of people only brings a broader perspective. And that's good. You need thinking outside the box. And that 10-year-old kid, maybe he looked at it differently. That person from wherever they're coming from, how can it be bad? I guess if you look at my camera's just done its thing. There it is. It's back. The numbers show us, though, if you look at the board level, diversity is not there. It's not there for women. It's not there for minorities. It's not there, and that has to have an effect. Because it's here, the CEO cares about one thing, and it's profit, really, ultimately, in a commercial organization. And so somehow it's got to be transferred to that punitive.
Yeah. It's funny, I look at this, and it's the same challenge I feel like we've had with identity, and where we have to get better with identity is that, look, we have to show the organization why this matters, like from a dollars perspective, right? Like identity, we went the insurance route. We're like, okay, look, this is how much it's going to save you or to protect you, or you buy. Right. We went that route, and okay, that works, and that doesn't really work on this one. But we have to be able to take, I think, one to really take identity to the next level, and then this with diversity, we have to be able to show the research and the numbers that says, look, having a diverse workforce gives you these things, right? Gives you a competitive advantage because of the fact that, to your point, like, it's like, look, let's sell it down to an engineering team. If I have a diverse engineering team, is they're coming up with things, right? Different backgrounds, different everything. when they're coming in to solve a problem, everybody's going to have a different way of doing something. It's a beautiful thing about programming, right? Is there's no one way to do anything, right? You can make a program 50 million different ways, and what it comes down to, what's the most efficient, and what gives us this, and what gives us that. So now you imagine this group of engineers who are working together. It's like, oh, well, I see it this way, right? One person, I'm going to show my age here. One person like really understands structs. One person really understands, classes and cohesion. And it's like you start to get that good battle in a way to where what comes out of that is a solid engineering effort and program that would have never been that hardening if you didn't have that diverse work. If you just have these one people who all think the same way, it's like, oh, okay, we'll do it this way. It's like, okay, well, great, right? And we've seen it, right?
Yeah.
The bug that comes out was like, how come nobody caught this? And they all look around like,
I don't know. It seems to me it's kind of worse in the US in some respects, right, than it is in several, not all, but some European countries. I would say that that diversity marker seems more prominent here in some way, and I don't know why that is. I mean, look at me, right? I'm a 50-year-old white guy. It's like I almost don't know myself what the challenges are and what causes that. But boy, I mean, I, like everyone, would have a vested interest in changing it. I'd hope. So, yeah, I think we have to. Coming back to our SailPoint time, I mean, we were very good with the women in tech side of things, right? The girl start support and women in identity. That was a, big support area for us. My daughter participated in that, and man, did she ever come back smarter. So, it's got to be a good thing.
You're in the legacy, man.
Yeah. And, I think it takes, it takes asking the question. And I'm super glad that you did, right? We could have geeked on about, identity forever. And we can still do that. But, you have to ask the question. You have to ponder the answer. And then something has to happen, some change. And I fear that the punitive legislation is probably the most productive way of moving it forward. It's just get your numbers up or else.
Right. And that's been you said it earlier, right? That's in our experience. That's what we've seen. That's what works, right? That's what's going to get the business to respond, is if they really feel like they have something to lose or fear out of it. And I think, that's one of the things there was, so there's an HBO show, Silicon Valley. I don't know if you ever saw it. Right?
Yeah.
Well, comedy, dumb comedy show, but parody on, right, the real Silicon Valley. But there was one episode where the guy, Gavin or whatever, right? I think he was supposed to be like their version of Bezos or whatever. But he leaves his company, whatever. But he comes up with this this ethics initiative, and the whole thing is fake, right? And that was the big scam of it. But he makes this big, huge thing about it because he's this name, get everybody talking about it. Oh, you got to sign the ethics thing, and just that you see the peer pressure of everybody wants to come and sign it and devote all this stuff or whatever. And so I started thinking, you know what? Like, here's the thing, though. What if I thought about a diversity inclusion initiative. Like, if we can get companies, like, you got to get people to come step up and say, look, we're going to do this, and here's why, right? And then what's the penalty behind it, like, right? Like, if we don't hit these numbers, what, right? Something that we could hold the companies accountable to, because I think that's the biggest problem is, like, Google or whoever can go out and say, look, we're gonna increase diversity by X% by 2024, right? Okay, cool. And then what happens when they don't hit it? Nothing, because there's nobody there to hold them accountable. Nobody.
Right, and of course, this is why, if there was an easy answer to these problems, I would hope someone would have delivered them before now. But a lot of it comes down to candidate flow, right? At that point, right? What is the diversity in your candidate flow? Well, that is a direct representation of people with the skills available. And at the end of the day, I think you have to take some of this money and you have to put it in the bottom, in direct impact programs. And like I said, that's what I implied to, this is a great space to do it. Right. If you want a chemical engineer, it's a lot. Software delivered down a piece of IP cable. It's super easy to provision. Give somebody a laptop, get them available to online training, and they can train themselves. And so it's coming into the bottom. And I'm woefully unaware of what that would really mean to do, but it sounds easy, right?
I think, I will say this, it's definitely it's sparking some ideas because I've always said that, like, you have to start, like, where are you recruiting from, right? And obviously, so I graduated from a historically Black college, university, and HBCU. So I'm always pushing people, like, look, go to the HBCUs, get relationships. Yeah. There's plenty of engineers coming out. But
great
as
point.
You're kind of getting this idea of, like, going, even going back further back. So let's start with, let's start at, grade school and middle school, right? How hard is it to get an initiative together with some of these companies and say, hey, let's do this. Let's make an initiative, and this money you're going to give back. And what we'll do is we'll package a laptop, some coding programs, get some, like, free subscriptions to, some of these IDEs and stuff like that or whatever, and some courses. And, maybe it's $1,000 per kid, right? Okay. Like,
very little,
right. You know what I'm saying? So let's do that. And I'm going to write a check for $20,000. How about I give, 20 of these, an entire class, these packages of, coding packages. So now you have a computer, you have access, and also let's give them, maybe a voucher for internet or whatever it is, things of that nature. Where, okay, let's take that and give that back. And to your point, like, start creating that pipeline then, because,
early.
Now you've got this kid, and maybe they pick it up, maybe they don't. But imagine you've got an 8 or 9 year old. Let's take an 8 or 9 year old girl, and she gets this, and she's like, wow. She starts getting into programming, and she remembers that it was XYZ company that gave her this package, right? And they came and they kind of talked about it. And so that started her path. When she gets ready to come out in college, she's going to be like, hey, I wonder if XYZ is still around, right? If we're going to apply for an internship,
yeah,
XYZ, because they're
exactly
started, right?
Well, I think it probably even sort of takes a step sideways when you go back in terms of media positioning, modeling. And I know that things have moved a long way. It used to be that when we got into this space, right, you were a geek. It was geeky, right? Everybody is net aware, connected, application aware. The world's changed a little bit. But even when you look at it and you look on TV and you look in media images of somebody that's getting into technology and computers, there's still this sort of, scrawny kid, kind of outcast kid that is pictured as that technical genius. We've just got to change that and make it much more like you're the guy that's in the media, that's on. You're at the front of what society now is. Look what we're doing. You and I are probably better able to do this because we're technical, right? And that sort of is a representation of hopefully where it can go. Let's get more positive imagery of what it is. Let's get kids that want to be part of it, and then tune it down to some of those minority groups that are less served by it and make it even more appealing for them. So,
right. And that was, and I just want to let everybody know. So Darran just actually gave a plug to the On the Corner Podcast Network, which is what I own and what it's all about, which is bringing light to that, right?
Right.
Other podcasts that are coming on, our media company are from, to get that side where you see people who are doing things and it's like, hey, they look like me, right? And it's why I have this podcast and why I get the guests that I have.
Beautiful.
And see, like, look, I can talk all this technical whatever. We can talk about these things, and you can look and see that this is a person that looks like you, that a person that looks
exactly.
Like
you. And sorry, I've got a dog going to bark here now. Somebody's that's the new world of COVID. We're all quite comfortable with this, being in the house thing. But yeah, but I do think that that you represent a very positive face for that, because you're extremely convincing. You're extremely good in front of people. You have that opportunity to drive that and I guess in some ways we need to find more people like you and put them where you are and what you're doing now, because that's gotta help.
Yeah,
gotta help.
I hope it will.
Yeah, I hope so too, because we're all better off for it. I don't know. I've always found myself almost sort of blind to minority in some way, and blind to some of the some of the sort of because they've never really affected me. I don't really, people are people. Even it sounds such a strange thing to say, but girls and boys, black and white, left and right. It's not. I've never personally, but I think I'm quite rare in that. So more positive action required.
It is. There's
for sure.
it all depends on, right? I think that what makes this whole conversation, more grayish and complex is that, everybody's point of view, it all comes from their perspective and their experiences, right? And
very true.
realize how much that kind of has an effect on what you see or even, how you perceive something, right? Like I use this example a lot, right? It's like, if you and I were at a street corner, you're on one side of the street, I was on the other side of the street, but we both saw the same car accident. We're both going to tell the story and we'll agree that we saw a car accident, but you had a different viewpoint than I did. So you're going to see it from a very different way than I see it. You're going to say, hey, no, the red truck hit the blue car. And I may see it from where I was at. I was like, actually, the blue car turned into the red truck, right? It's like, those perspectives are what makes it complex. But if we step back, we can both agree. It's like, look, we both know there was a car accident. Like you saw a car accident, I saw a car accident. But our perspectives are what changes. And I think that's where we don't give each other, enough space to understand and take a step outside of ourselves and realize that, hey, there's a different perspective here, right?
Yeah,
and
very much so.
Understand that perspective.
And I think I've been super lucky. I count myself lucky every day in every way. Even at the fine-grained level, I've never, the group of people I've always worked with have always been super balanced, nice, people. And so I've never had or seen at close quarters an experienced negative preference in that way. And if I had, it would probably have driven me a little further in my career to do something about this issue before now. But, I'm lucky that I've worked with groups of people that are very balanced, that are very nice. And so, to your point, your perspective is driven by what you've seen. And if you've seen someone being trodden on, it has to make an effect on you, And definitely. I'm just fortunate I've never seen it. But never say never. So
Darran, as we wrap up, we're going to get to the last section of the podcast. So this is the world famous section, because everybody loves this section. It's called The Last Sip. I totally forgot we're supposed to have cocktails. I meant to grab my beer. I forgot it. So we will have an honorary cocktail after this, but it's called The Last Sip. So we'll get to that section right now.
Okay.
All right. So this is the question I ask every guest that comes on the pod, right? Yep. There you go. Get ready. And it's, what do you want your legacy to be?
Oh my goodness. I wish you told me about that one first and I could have thought it through, because I'm going to seem really unimaginative now. What do I want my legacy to be? I'm not, maybe I should be more concerned about it, but I'm not. I guess in some respects, I've never really worried too much what anyone's in me, with a haircut like this, a QED, right? But I think, I guess if the question is, how would I want people to think about me? I would hope that they would see me as being considered and balanced, and everyone wants to be smart, right? Everyone wants to be, but I'm not really too worried about that. I think I'd like to think I've made an impact on identity as an industry. We've been in this space for a long time, so we have a lot of claim to its originality. But I'd like to think that we've moved security forward, and that's such a colloquial thing to say. It's right in this bucket here. I'd like to think that we've contributed to a more secure, better, ecosystem at large with the things that we built and deployed. And like I say, I think I'm very fortunate. I've been surrounded by just good people with like yourself, that have got an interest and a passion. And so I guess to have been able to reflect that back and have some passion and interest myself, and also not a dog that barks. That's a pretty weak one, but I got no cocktail, so we're good.
I know. That's on me. I should have made sure we had the cocktails ready before we started. That's the one part of this podcast that's been lacking. I know a lot of people hit me up. Was like, "Dave, where's all the cocktails?" I'm like, "Look, man, it's COVID. There's a lot going on."
Exactly. But yeah, I think, just to, my career has always been somewhat important to me, but I've just felt I've had a pretty balanced view on that. I've got a lot of personal interest. I'm a kite surfer and windsurfer. I like mountain biking. And so I've been very fortunate that I've been balanced in that respect. So I've had a lot of fulfillment that have come from other areas. But I think if the question was professional, it would be, I could say I've worked with some good people and they didn't think I'm a jerk. Pretty low bar.
All right, we're gonna wrap up with that. Darran, thanks again for taking the time being on the pod. It's good to see you, man. Good to talk to you. Always have fun talking about identity.
Yeah, and let's get that cocktail again soon.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm hoping in the months to come this whole thing swells down and we could actually just go somewhere, have a proper cocktail. And
that's what we need is a simulcast kind of app or something that makes you pour and drink at the same time, so you can truly do it, remote.
There we go. I'll have to. I don't have enough cycles to come up with that. I don't know. We'll see. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, mate.
To the next conversation. You guys stay safe out there. Thanks for listening to Cocktails, Code, and Conversation. Of course, this episode is brought to you by the On the Corner Podcast Network. Check us out at onthecorner.us. Also, please like, rate, subscribe, follow on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Or if you're watching on our YouTube channel, go ahead, subscribe, click the button to get the notification anytime there's a new podcast coming out. Of course, there's also more great content coming as well. Please check out the C3 merchandise store. You can go to c3.onthecorner.us to check out all of our merch. You can get a nice shirt like this and also your official C3 Squad member shirt. Just go ahead and sign up for the C3 Squad and check out our merch store. So with that, y'all know what it is. To the next cocktail, to the next conversation. Stay safe out there.